The movie opens with a distorted radio broadcast announcing a ceasefire that failed to save villagers from destruction. Suddenly, the broadcast is interrupted by the radio noise. After some turning, another broadcast declares President Clinton's concern over the deteriorating situation in Sarajevo. However, the radio noise interrupts it again. Upon hearing other stations, it turns into the RTLM radio station that played a significant role in the Rwandan genocide. The broadcast is abundant in ethnic stereotyping, contempt, and as well as hatred towards the Tutsi population. According to the RTLM, the Tutsi are collaborating with the Belgian colonists who stole the Hutu land to whip them off. Additionally, it declares that the Tutsis are now rebels, cockroaches, and murderers, promising to eradicate the infestation. It also promises to eliminate the RPF, the Rwandan Patriotic Front rebels. Finally, the RTLM concludes the broadcast by stating that it is the Hutu Power Radio cautioning the Hutus to remain vigilant of their neighbors. The movie then shifts to Kigali in 1994, where we see Paul, a hotel manager. The hotel he manages is under the Belgian Airlines, and he arrives at the airport with his friend Dube in a van. Outside, there are many armed and unarmed military people showing the stress of the current situation in Rwanda. And Paul meets with the pilots to receive a box of cigarettes from Havana. Along the way, he tells Dube about the cigars. In the next scene, we see George, a business partner of the hotel where Paul works, and he asks Paul if he's going to the Hutu rally that day, and Paul declines, saying that he's too busy. Later, they go down to the storeroom where we see a carrot full of machetes fall. George explains how he got them from China. Back in the car, Dube is extremely concerned. However, Paul tells him what they're doing is only business. As they drive, they encounter an ongoing Hutu rally. Dube becomes anxious when he spots a few of his Tutsi neighbors who might recognize him. So, when they are pulled over, Paul pulls out a shirt that George gave him and tells them that they are Hutu. Consequently, they leave them alone as they make it to the hotel without a scratch. Later in the hotel, Colonel Oliver, the head of the UN peacekeeping forces in Rwanda, as well as General Bismugu, the head of the Rwandan armed forces, discussed the Interahamwe militia, a Hutu militia trained by the government secretly, not heeding the peace agreement. And Colonel Oliver expresses his concern, but General Bismugu tells him not to worry. Later that night, Paul is listening to the RTLM at home when it replays a warning to the president not to trust the Tutsi rebels. Suddenly, his son Roger comes running to tell him that there were soldiers on the streets. When Paul goes to check, he sees soldiers forcibly taking his neighbor Victor, a Tutsi, claiming that he's a spy for the rebels. Tatiana, Paul's wife, who's also a Tutsi, later asks him to use his connections to get Victor out of jail. But Paul refuses, saying he will only use such connections for family. The next morning, Jack, a cameraman, and David, a reporter, with a black British assistant cameraman, arrive at a hotel in Rwanda in the morning. One of them asks Benedict, a local journalist, about the differences between the Hutus and Tutsis. Benedict explains that the Belgians created the division between the two groups by considering Tutsis longer and more elegant and using them to run the country, while leaving the Hutus in charge when they left. The Hutus then took revenge for years of repression. Later on TV, General Bismugu denies allegations that the Rwandan army is training the Hutu militia. He also supports the president's agreement to make peace with the rebels. After this, Colonel Oliver gives a speech about the peace treaty as everyone celebrates the peace to come. That night, Tatiana's brother Thomas comes with his wife Fedens, both Tutsis, to visit Paul at the hotel. They warn him that things are going to be bad, urging him to leave. Thomas tells him the signal to go to war will be the phrase, "cut the tall trees." Although Paul is doubtful, Fedens offers to take Tatiana with them. Paul assures them that the UN is present, then he asks them to go home. Later that night, while driving home, Tom sees a burning house. He rushes to his house to find Tatiana with many of his Tutsi neighbors seeking refuge there. They inform him that the president's plane was shot mid-air and his son Roger is also missing. He later finds Roger covered in blood, but he is unharmed. And the city is in a riot and Tutsis are being slaughtered. Gunshots can be heard in the morning and the radio confirms the president's death, signaling to cut the tall trees. The military suddenly surround Paul's house. Subsequently, he goes to speak with them. After showing them his identity card, they demand the keys to the hotel. Paul convinces them to take his family as well as his neighbors. Along the way, they see corpses, including their friends and neighbors, furthermore witness an ongoing slaughter of Tutsis. When they arrive at the Diplomat Hotel, Paul gives the keys to the ranking officer. However, they've already found out that the people with Paul are Tutsis. The officer slaps Paul and calls him a traitor, demanding that he shoots them. Paul negotiates with them, thereafter promising to get them the rest of the money from the hotel. They agree, and Paul delivers on his promise and gets them to the hotel safely. In the hotel, everyone is panicking. As foreigners are demanding their passports, Paul secures a suite room for his family and a staff room for some of his neighbors. He deals with the foreigners and discovers that Gregory, a Hutu staff member, has moved to the presidential suite. Paul goes to Gregory and asks him to go back to work, but Gregory threatens to expose Paul's hiding of Tutsis inside the hotel. Later, Madame Archer, a Red Cross worker, brings a group of Tutsi children from an orphanage. Paul then asks her to bring Thomas, his wife, with their 2 daughters to the hotel. In the morning, David interviews Colonel Oliver and asks him if they will intervene to stop the massacre. He replies that they are peacekeepers and not peacemakers, and they will not intervene. Jack, the cameraman, asks David to leave the hotel to cover the events outside, but David insists on not leaving without an armored car. But Jack later leaves with his assistant. In the next scene, Paul enters the kitchen with a pile of dirty dishes, only to find his staff listening to the radio. He instructs them to turn off the radio and to resume their work, but they refuse, citing the absence of their boss. Paul insists that he is their boss, but they only laugh at him. Feeling very frustrated, he retreats to his office to call Mr. Tylens, the president of the Sabina in Belgium. He receives a letter, which he shows to his staff before crumpling it and throwing it away. He then goes on to give them an impassionated speech recommending them to keep working. Later that day, Paul visits David in his room. Jack bursts in, shows them a gruesome video of people being murdered as corpses are lining up the streets. That night, Jack apologizes, but Paul believes the world needs to see what's happening in Rwanda. Jack disagrees, stating that people will only feel pity and do nothing. The following morning, the Interahamwe militants encircle the town. They present a UN soldier's helmet with blood, revealing that they've killed UN soldiers, including 10 of Colonel Oliver's Belgian UN soldiers and the Lady Prime Minister. That night, Madame Archer returns to inform Paul that his in-laws are missing, but their 2 daughters are safe. She also reveals that Tutsi children are being slaughtered to eradicate the next generation. Foreign soldiers arrive the next day. As the people celebrate their rescue, Paul understands that they're there to evacuate foreigners and not intervene in the slaughter of Rwandans because that's none of their business, apparently. And as people are evacuated, the foreigners leave in shame while the locals are left in despair. Tatiana urges Paul to leave taking the children, but he refuses to abandon her. The next morning, military personnel wake Paul at gunpoint, ordering him to leave the hotel. In order to buy some time, Paul bargains with the soldiers for 10 minutes. He then makes a secret call to Sabina's headquarters in Belgium. During the call, he warns them that everyone, including 100 staff members and 800 guests, will be killed if they don't leave the hotel. Mr. Tillens puts Paul on hold to contact the French, who support the Hutu army in order to stop them. Dubé is then instructed to extract the guest list, but Paul steps in to provide a list from the previous 2 weeks. However, an argument breaks out when the ranking officer, the lieutenant, demands list for all the cockroaches. Soon after, the lieutenant's radio interrupts their conversation. He then quickly leaves, promising to remember Paul if he ever returns. As they leave, Paul goes in search of his family. Then, as he finds his family on the rooftop, Paul contacts Mr. Tillens to confirm their safety. However, he learns from Mr. Tillens that evacuation is not feasible because Rwanda is not valuable enough for Europeans or Americans to intervene. Paul gathers all the hotel guests and updates them about the situation, encouraging them to reach out to influential individuals to pressure them into providing help. Some days later, Paul has managed to make strategic adjustments to maintain the hotel's 4-star rating while still accommodating refugees. They debate whether the ongoing events in Rwanda constitute genocide, which suggests that their efforts to call for help have yielded positive results. In the next scene, Paul desperately tries to protect the hotel by asking General Bismugu to spare some policemen. He even goes as far as bribing the general with a promise of a reward from the president of the Sabina. Paul also manages to successfully convince the general to force Gregory to go back to work. Early the next morning, Paul and Gregory head to George's place to procure supplies. While at George, they're confronted with the appalling sight of Tutsi women kept naked in a cage like savages. After trading the supplies, George attempts to persuade Paul to switch sides, and Paul declines as they are pressed for time. George advises them to take the Riverside Road, which is free of obstructions. However, during their journey, their van begins to jolt, and they soon realize that they're traveling on a road filled with Tutsi corpses. Paul instructs Gregory to take the alternative road to the hotel and to keep their observations confidential. Upon returning to the hotel, Paul is fraught with anxiety and he confides in Dubé about his experience. At night, Paul invites Tatiana to dinner on the rooftop. They both have fun as they momentarily forget about the situation until they see a heavy fire at a distance. Paul tells Tatiana that if the militia comes and he can't make it in time, she must take the children to jump off the roof because the machete is a worse way to die. Tatiana breaks down in tears and says she can't do it, but Paul pleads with her and she hugs him tightly. The following morning, Colonel Oliver arrives to inform them that their calls have worked as he has come with exit visas for some families staying in the hotel, including Paul's family. He promises that there will be another plane soon. Later, he asks Madame Archer if she can bring the girls by any means, to which she agrees. As they prepare to leave the next day, Paul decides to stay behind to protect the remaining refugees. Tatiana, as well as their children, cry out to him, but he promises to join them on the next flight. Soon after they leave, Gregory is seen taking a van and leaving too. The RTLM radio continues to provoke the Hutus to kill all the remaining Tutsis, and it reported that some Tutsis are escaping from Paul's hotel. Dubé tells Paul that it was Gregory who betrayed them and called the military. Paul calls General Bizumugu to inform him of the situation. Meanwhile, Colonel Oliver with all the other refugees is being attacked by a massive group of Hutus, killing a few Tutsis in the vehicle. The military come to save them, but they order nobody to leave the hotel. After they return to the hotel, Tatiana gets angry with Paul because he left her, but he apologizes as they decide to make decisions together from then on. The general arrives for the goods he was promised for his services, but Paul has nothing. Then, the general says that there is nothing more he can do for him. This means that the hotel will no longer be protected by the military. At the same night, a rocket hits the hotel's storeroom, but no one is seriously injured. The following morning, a broadcast announces that the Tutsi rebels have made a rapid advance and many Hutus are evacuating to the Congo. Colonel Oliver tells them that the Hutu generals are willing to accept a deal that includes exchanging Hutu prisoners for the Tutsis in the hotel, which will get all of them behind the rebel lines where it's safe. But he's gonna need 2 days to organize it. And Paul fears that the Interahamwe, a group of Hutus who secretly organized by the military, will kill all of them in 2 days as he has nothing left to bribe them with. The following day, Paul and the general visit the diplomat's office to gather some items for trade. Upon their arrival, they witness Tutsi rebels militarily engaged in a heated battle with the military. Paul offers what remains in the diplomat's hotel safe to help the general. Paul then implores the general to rescue the people at the hotel, but the general suggests that Paul accompany them to their new base in Gitarama instead. However, Paul declines, citing the imminent arrival of the Interahamwe at the hotel. The general appears resolute, but Paul confronts him, revealing that he is on the list of war criminals as he led the massacres. He implores the general to testify about how he helped the hotel, but he refuses to do so unless the general assists him presently. The general then attempts to force Paul with a gun, but Paul stands his ground, showing that he is willing to die. Fearful, the general agrees. As they proceed to the hotel, they find out that the Interahamwe have already arrived. Meanwhile, the military takes on the militia while Paul searches for his family. Along the way, he runs into Gregory, who has joined the militia. The militia captures Paul, but the military intervenes to release him. Paul ascends to the rooftop where he told his wife to jump. He sees 2 people below and rushes to them, only to discover a woman and her children who were hiding. Desperate to find his family, Paul eventually locates them in a bathroom, concealed behind the curtains. In the next scene, Paul chooses the hotel as everyone heads to a nearby camp. Along the way, they encounter several Interahamwe approaching them, unaware that Tutsi rebels are preparing to ambush them. The rebels swiftly take out the Interahamwe, and the road becomes clear. Upon reaching the camp, Paul with his wife search for their niece until it's time to board the bus to Tanzania. Madame Archer identifies one of the children from the hotel. She rushes to the bus to locate their niece, Finally, everybody's ecstatic that they've reunited as a family. And the movie concludes with text informing the audience that Paul, his wife, children, and nieces are now living in Belgium. However, Tatiana's brother and his wife's bodies were never recovered. It's also revealed that General Bismugu and George received life imprisonment sentences and that the genocide claimed almost 1 million lives. And that was my recap of the movie Hotel Rwanda. I hope you guys enjoyed this recap. Make sure to leave a like and leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Subscribe to my channel. I'll see you guys on my next recap. Bye.